Welcome, Whitworth University. This is Dylan Reyes. I am currently in the studio right now. I am so excited to be here with you guys today. There's a lot of cool things happening in the studio. First thing I guess we can say, well, I can say, is that Ike is not here today. So for all you Ike fans out there, he's no longer with, no, he's with us still, but he's just, the boy is chilling up in Hawaii right now. So send him some love when you can. Yeah, we got a great show lined up for you guys today. If you're listening right now, hello. Welcome to our studio. Yeah, so just a quick synopsis of who we are. We're InDifference, the podcast. We're just, typically two friends who are in the studio together. We like to listen to good music and talk about real issues. So if you're listening and you're joining us today, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Yeah, we have a very, very cool show lined up for you guys. We're going to talk about just different ways that the college institution is just how it's affecting students from minoritized backgrounds. And so because of that, we have kind of a cool different thing that we're doing today. So we'll be going through some things. We'll be going through some articles, just kind of hanging out, doing that. But yeah, that's kind of the plan today. Today's podcast is very special for me, I think, and for like a lot of other students too, this topic of education. And so if you're listening right now and you're an administrative person, this is the episode you're going to want to listen to. Today's Real Talk, we'll be going through different things like articles, different things like surveys, really practical things that you can do as a university, as an administration, to make sure that these students feel heard and known. There's a lot of interesting things that I think we miss at the administrative level that we often sometimes don't associate with the student who's in the university level. Interesting things that we're going to discuss. We have some cool articles that we'll go over. And yeah, we hope that you like today's show. There's a couple things I want to say before we begin. That last song that you heard, the first one, is called Board of Education. It's by an artist named Propaganda. If you know him, he's incredible. He's a legend. The guy has an incredible fan base, and guess what, Whitworth University? We got him to come to the school on February 5th here at Whitworth University. That's right, Propaganda. The guy is insane. He's on Spotify. Check him out. That last song was called Board of Education from his Selected Songs album. That album is full of good ones, but he's got a new album out right now called Crooked, and it has songs like Gentrify, Darky, I Hate Cats. I mean, and Made Straight. That's another one that I really like. If you guys are just need some cool study background music, it's truth. So get ready. But yeah, he's a great artist. So check him out on the Spotify. Speaking of Spotify, we have our official InDifference playlist on the Spotify platform. So if you are thinking about, doing homework and you just want some good beats to get you through the night, this is a great playlist that my main man Ike put up. So please feel free to look at that. Suggest some songs to put on it. You can always message us on our Facebook page. We have our InDifference podcast Facebook page also that you can like, and then follow that playlist. We have exciting news. We have a new website up and running. It's called the InDifferencePodcast.wordpress.com, and there we'll have most of our episodes uploaded. The first episode is actually up right now, so if you want to go check that out, listen to what we talked about. That was like our first show. We had no idea basically what we were doing, but we just kind of played around with it, and yeah, now where we're at today, which is honestly maybe a little bit better. I'm still learning how to do this stuff. There's always more to learn too in the radio realm. But yeah, welcome to the show. Like I said, we're talking about the ways that college is overlooking the needs of minoritized students. I call today's show Choosing the White University. It's a play on like choosing the right university. You see what I'm doing? Okay. And yeah, it's going to be basically just looking into the ways that college is affecting these students. Students from first generation college backgrounds, students from no generation backgrounds, or continuing students. We're going to look at the comparison between the two. We're going to talk about an interesting article that just got released by Irrelevant about Moody, our cousin college. And we'll be discussing different opinions on that. Yeah, this is a really special topic for me as a first generation college student, and also as a mixed race student, that I fall into different categories sometimes. It's hard for me to kind of pinpoint, I guess, what my identity looks like at the college realm. And it's a really confusing time for a lot of students that fall in minoritized backgrounds. So we're doing that. There's an interesting article by Vox that I'm going to go through about first generation college students and just poor students in general, and how the university is subtly discriminating against them. If you were on our show, by the way, on our first or second episodes, we talked about this article. It's a great one. I'll put these up on the Facebook page if you need. And then we'll talk about a Newsweek article titled "Why Minority Students Don't Graduate from College." We'll discuss that and basically talk through that. We're going to talk about how this affects students of color and their mental health by HuffPost. And then finally, we'll end on a good note. Admins, this is when, if you're listening, you're going to want to take some notes. I found this neat article about the different ways that universities can be aware of these needs, and it's from the Century Foundation. So that'll be our practical, here's where we'll end, basically. So stay tuned. There's a lot to come. We have a great show lined up today, and hopefully you walk away learning something new, and you learn not to be indifferent in these areas. So without further ado, I'm going to play another song, and we'll get started here in a sec. This next song is called Skywalker, and it's by Miguel. If you don't know it, it's a great one. Look at Miguel's new album, by the way, if you get a chance. He's a legend. His new album is called War and Leisure. So we'll get that started for you guys. Welcome back to the studio. If you're joining the podcast right now, this is Dylan, and I am here by myself in the studio. And this is the InDifference podcast. Welcome. So today we're talking about the different ways that students are being affected by their colleges or universities. I just have to say before we begin that this conversation that we're going to have right now, this is coming out of a place of a lot of history. We think about the stories, the numerous stories that were told before we as students arrived, that built the universities that we now study in. And these are super important conversations because we need to know as a generation especially that we are riding on the backs of countless stories, countless people's lives that were affected. And so I just wanted to take a moment to honor that is a reality. That's a big reason why we decided to start this podcast, was because these issues are issues that both Ike and I have come face to face with at our school, and we're unashamed of that, and we are fully aware that it is causing a disruption of the peace, so to speak, and we're aware of that. We know that there's a constant tension, and we are also aware that that's a reality. And at the same time, that there's this reality, the struggle, so to speak, of white superiority and every other racial or ethnic group on campus that is face to face with white superiority every single day. Every day that they attend the school and the university system. And our job right now as students who are interested in this, our job isn't to bash the other side. Our job is to expose the other side, to talk about the reality of the schools that we attend, the reality of the education system as it exists today, the different ways that this culture of normalized whiteness and microaggressions is pervading campuses all across the country, even our own. And to keep you guys aware as students of this so that you know how to interact with it. I'm a half Mexican, half American student. I only see this from a biracial perspective. And this is a day that we're going to continue this conversation too. I really want Ike to be here. He has an experience that's different than mine, but I think could also expose some realities to this subject. I'm fully aware too that I'm not a professional when it comes to this information, but I know that these stories are experiences that can't be denied, that they can't be invalidated. And so that's my job, is to help share these stories. The first story we have today is an article written by have felt these things, or I've heard these things from my close friends. What is that? And I wanted to explore that today. The article provokes some feelings. It provokes some thoughts. And I want you to know, if you're listening, that you're not alone. If you have had an experience that's not like the majority, that you are not alone in your feelings about how it feels so strange. And if you're feeling those things and you're on this campus and you want to share that, please call in 509-777-3278. That's 509-777-3278. I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking right now. Let me just kind of enter into this article. It's about this, so it's about several different stories, but the first one is about a guy named Ernest Gray in 2002. He's a young black student at Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. And a white student comes up to him carrying a heavy baton, similar to one that police would carry. And he says, "You remember Rodney King, don't you?" And if you're aware of who Rodney King was, it was one of the most infamous cases of police brutality of the 90s. Basically, it's created such a traumatic experience. I mean, if you were in his position and somebody came up to you, searing that into your memory, making you relive this thing that not a lot of people can relate to, it's disturbing. But this thing kind of happens, at least more subtly now, more than we realized. The irony behind this story is that the white student who threatened the black student at Moody was a student that was training to do missions across seas. And I can't tell you what kind of issues I have with that. I mean, the amount of ignorance that is at work in this student's life is unbelievable. And that's why we're doing this talk show too, to expose you to things that are ignorant, so that you don't stay indifferent towards them, but you are actively not being ignorant. That's the whole point of why we do what we do. I mean, it furthers on that that there are many other countless students like Gray, Ernest Gray, who are so aware of this culture that it's not a surprise to them. And if you've been in a university institution where white superiority is the norm, so to speak, white culture is the norm, this stuff isn't a surprise to you. Patterns of microaggressions and institutional resistance to diversify aren't a surprise to you. But this stretches back decades. This is histories. And if you're at an institution that's behind 10 years, then this stuff will be relatable. This is why I think this stuff needs to be exposed. Yeah, there's other parts of his story I'd like to share. Just he talks about his feeling of being alienated in chapel services because the music was culturally white. If that's ringing a bell for you, it is for me. Black gospel songs were only played on occasion during Black History Month during his time at Moody. If you are aware of these things and you're nodding as you're listening, you're thinking, yes, that's relatable. I'd love to hear about your experience if you go to Whitworth. Kind of reinforce this feeling. But there's a constant tension between the majority and the students of minoritized groups that I hope can be reconciled one day. There's another student, Micah Borns, who's a student from Moody. He's actually a hip-hop artist, and he graduated in 2010 from Moody Bible Institute. Yeah, he says, sure, no one ever told me I was unwelcome, but their thinking and actions excluded people of color like me. If you're listening, you're an administrative person, take out a notepad. Most of the time, when students share their experiences at the college level, they're not sharing these experiences to downplay the institution, to downplay the work, so to speak, that's coming out of administrative offices. They're sharing their experiences that cannot be invalidated and shouldn't be ignored. And if you're listening and you can't fathom why students feel that way, there's more questions you need to ask yourself about the environment that the student's in. I want to talk to you about their theology program and how white privilege pervades their theology curriculum. I'm a student of theology here at Whitworth University. I'm studying theology here. And this guy, Micah Borns, he also graduated, and he was required to take a lot of religion theology courses as well to graduate. And he told the relevant article guy that wrote this article, he told him, along with other students, that the curriculum almost never included a black or brown thinker. So that's the thing. He also, another student of color says that people underestimate how hard it is to go to classes where you're learning about your faith and your culture isn't a part of it at all. Pendleton, the guy, John Pendleton, who said that, he also said, the curriculum centered on Western culture and left out narratives of about people of color. So I've had to work to decolonize my theology since then. And this is another thing I want to talk to you guys about. Our InDifference podcast, we wanted to stress the importance of theology and the importance of kind of a Christ-centered focus on this talk show. Ike and I are all about reconciliation and trying to get two groups to come together to talk about this stuff. Because if it doesn't go talked about, if two sides continue to have conversations without having them with each other, at least at an interpersonal level, things will never be reconciled. I mean, I'm a very different person than Ike, and we, just based on our friendship, have been able to have conversations that are so incredible, so valuable. I learned so much from him. And there's times when I think to myself, like, man, these sort of things need to happen more. As a theology student, I feel like I'm more concerned with the reconciliation of people groups than a theological aspect that I learn about in the classroom. And if you're like me and you're like John Pendleton, the student at Moody, then you can relate to this statement that it's hard to go to these classes when you're learning all about the theological aspects of your education, theological aspects of different thinkers, primarily Dutch theologians, Dutch white theologians, but culture isn't a part of it. And if you're anything like me, I've been studying liberation theology here at Whitworth, and I'm proud of that because Latin American liberation theology is a part of the culture that my dad was raised in, is part of the culture that my dad grew up in, and that's essentially a part of me, but yet I had no idea about it because it's not introduced to me. And I can relate in that, like, I've had to deconstruct my version of theology. When I first arrived here, I thought that the line of theology that I was studying was the only line, and that's until I started reading about liberation theologians who discussed, like helping the poor, helping incorporate your cultural identity into who you are. And as students, I think it's important that we continue to develop a sense of self, a sense of identity, especially if you're studying theology, because if you don't know who you are, and you don't know how that relates to who you are in God, you're going to have a very, very difficult time going out into the world and helping other people. And that's like a thing that I think needs to be talked about more, at least here on campus, is what does our department say about what we do post Whitworth? What does our department say about what we decide to engage with even while we're at Whitworth? I think Whitworth kind of tends to sometimes err in the side of being kind of like a bubble or like a, like we call it the pinecone curtain here at Whitworth University. There's this idea that like here is where you're at for the 4 years. You don't stray too far outside. But if you go outside into some of the areas in Spokane, you're immediately exposed to some of this stuff. If you're thinking about doing that, there's two neighborhoods. I think of specifically the West Central neighborhood and not Kendall Yards, but the Hilliard district. So if you're thinking about trying to get exposed to the reality of Spokane, those neighborhoods are a good place to start. Even just walking around and just kind of seeing with your eyes the ways that there's a different world out there. Yeah, so I want to go back to this article really quick. There's different ways that also white privilege can tend to dominate the campus discourse. There's a student that was interviewed in the same article. She was leading this thing called Embrace, which is kind of a diversity, equity, and inclusion movement amongst students. And there were a lot of people that were just outraged that she was doing this. She said that she was not just having difficult conversations with students, but other teachers and administrators also emailed her to tell her that she shouldn't be talking about white privilege. People across campus were ripping down flyers, scribbling stereotypes on them. I mean, this was common for her. So when we think about how students engage with these things, we need to be smarter people. When students decide to write articles that expose truth, yes, you can go against the article and you can, I guess, threaten a student not to do that, or don't talk about white privilege. Look at the facts, things like that. When you do things like that, you're essentially silencing a voice. It doesn't matter what kind of argument you're looking for. You're silencing a voice, an experience of a student who had a valid experience, and to tell them that they shouldn't, or that they need to stop talking about it, essentially, because, the university is doing things. But if a student has an experience, you can't invalidate a student's experience. That seems like common sense, right? And if you're listening, and if you feel like, there are valid ways that the university is doing things, that's great. But when it comes to a student's experience of those things that you're doing, and if a student is still feeling that way, you need to take note of that. That's your student. That's a part of your family. I want to continue on. This student, Tiana Taylor, she's the one who had administrative people basically threaten her. She's also one of several black students who said that white students often touch her hair without permission and make comments about its texture and differences from white hair. So that's another thing that just like don't do. It's not your hair. I know in white culture it's very like normal to be very touchy with different things, but that's not a thing you do, because, and especially out of the context of you being a white person, saying how different it is, how different the texture is. I think they know that. Like, that's not something you point out, especially from a white perspective. That's just like one microaggression, though. I think like you do as a dominant culture, just because I think what it's saying is you're trying to relate, but what it says is that you're different from me, and I'm pointing out the obvious reason why. It just seems like respect too. Like you don't, go up to a stranger and do that. And even if they are your friend, like, I don't know. That just seems like kind of a personal space thing too at the end of the day. Yeah, there's also other things I think about this movement at Moody. There's different professors that are very resistant towards this, saying that like things like white privilege and exposing those terms are offensive on its face and unworthy of Christian discourse. Yada, yada, yada. These arguments basically shutting down students' experiences. Talking about the term white privilege, I think, is extremely worthy of Christian rhetoric, Christian discourse. I think it's one of the biggest reasons why we have division, is because there's this lack of knowledge when it comes to understanding what white privilege is, but also understanding the weight of that and how that affects students. There's different things too that other professors at this university would are also very, very commonly, they might not resist or say they're resisting, but I was recently at a lunch this last semester actually, with a speaker who was talking about their experience, Dr. Miguel de la Torre, and he was talking about his experience and how his people don't have hope. And that's an extreme statement. And I think he even would argue too that he doesn't have hope, at least the hope that we've defined it in American term. And there is this, I was sitting amongst faculty in my department, and it's really easy as a white theologian and as someone who's studying scriptures from a white perspective and white experience to say things like, how could you not have hope? And I think that's the common response to people who come from majority culture, who don't get the privileges that they have, that have made life easier to see God, even easier to experience God. And I know that this is kind of weighty and racy to say, but I have a feeling that the white experience does help you easily have hope. Because when the majority of your culture values you, gives you the experience, it's easier to say, I have hope. But when you're a student or a person from a minoritized background, this hope doesn't come easily. It comes with cost. It comes with risk. It comes with the possibility of you being ignored. This is all too common at the university level. There's more to say too about this article. I'm going to put it up on our Facebook page. We just need to continue to move this, keep having these conversations, Whitworth. I'm holding you accountable, Whitworth University, to make sure that these kind of conversations are happening and that we become more aware of them. I want to step into a different realm now and talk about a different aspect of the university, the subtle ways that colleges discriminate against poor students. So this is an article written by Vox. If you were on the show in one of our first episodes, we discussed the subtle ways that our university is discriminating against people, especially first generation and poor students. They start off the article by describing different values or different interdependent or independent values. We learn that students that come in with an independent mindset are coming in learning how to express themselves. And in fact, administrators have a very clear bias of what kind of student they want. 84% of administrators from top-tier schools and 69% from second-tier schools preferred independent traits within students. But as we know, students that are coming into the university setting aren't coming in with independent values, especially if they're from first-generation college backgrounds or poor, or even like low-income backgrounds. I keep saying poor. The article says poor. I'm going to use low-income. Just sounds better. But anyway, they talk about, independent values are things like you learn how to express yourself, you learn how to be a leader, you learn to solve problems on your own, you learn how to do independent research, how to work independently, how to influence others. Those are all independent values. But when we think about students from minoritized backgrounds who are coming into the college, they usually exhibit these kind of traits. They learn how to work together with others. They learn how to do collaborative research. They learn how to listen to others. They learn how to be a team player. They learn how to ask others for help. And they learn to adjust to others' expectations. And it's just striking because this is the reality of the university level, is that there's just different needs and different values that students come in with. And so when we think about like how this gets really worrisome for college, is that even when lower and working class students graduate from high school and go to college, something quite sobering happens if you follow them for a few years. They struggle to graduate compared to their wealthier peers, and we'll see this too in another article I have. And this gap widens basically. And students from poor families are often more likely to go to colleges with lower graduation rates and lower admission standards. These schools tend to have fewer resources compared to the other flagship, state universities. But there's something else about this environment that also betrays students. from lower income families and lower working class families. And we tend to think that it's all financial conversation, but there's something that's perpetuated by the beliefs and the values that the upper middle class people have. So they talk about big picture things like what we think the purpose of college is, to more mundane things like our eating and vacationing habits. And when mixed with this country's imprecise way of talking about class, it creates a toxic environment that stunts the performances of students who are trying to climb the social class ladder. In other words, the very way we think about college makes it a finishing school for people from affluent families and a glass ceiling for anyone else. That's from the article. So there's kind of this reality in the college setting. The students that come in from majority backgrounds or from higher income families are coming in, with very, very little to no risk. The motives that, first generation students come to college versus continuing generation students is interesting. Students often say that they want to help their family out when they're done with college. They want to provide a better life for their children. They want to give back to their community. They want to show that people from the background that they're coming from can also do well. They want to be a role model for their community, and they want to bring honor to their family. But when it comes to independent reasons, like they want to expand their knowledge of the world, understanding of the world, new interests, they want to become an independent thinker, there's a few less students that want to do that too. And so when we think about how this plays out, there's different ways, but I think one of the biggest ways is our family backgrounds that we come from. We don't think about how any sort of family background that you come from is going to affect how you go into college. It's going to affect how you find resources. It's going to affect how you do schoolwork, how you do studying, how you do all these things that lead to the success or the potential failure of your educational experience. These are big deals. This is a big deal when we think about our students, especially here at Whitworth, how they're getting their education, how they're receiving it, how they're going about engaging with it. Do they know the right ways to engage with it? All questions that the university administration needs to be asking. And I would also further too that these conversations pour into the graduate life of a low income person. So when they come into, so if they graduate, which is another question almost entirely, but if they graduate, what are they doing to respond to the education that they received? Are they even getting jobs to be able to do that? And then we think about, this is another question we can think about as students is, what are the ways that the people that are giving back to Whitworth, what are the backgrounds that they're coming from? And what are the initiatives that they're funding? Are they funding initiatives from the majority student background? Or are they funding initiatives from the minoritized student background? So when we think about, let's just say we have a campus. Let's say we have 35% first generation students. It's a big number. It's a very big number for college. But let's just say that that's the number. Let's say that about, half of that group doesn't graduate. The other half does graduate, right? They have a little bit harder time getting a job. They have a harder time getting an internship. Is their priority thinking about how they're going to get back to the school? Probably not. And those are the people who are supposed to give back to those initiatives to then fund those programs that are bringing students like them to the university. The issue is that they're not doing that. The people who are coming back and funding things are the people who had great experiences, are the people that are coming from the majority experience. That's just a reality. I got to sit in on an institutional advancement committee, and I noticed almost immediately how different things were being exposed, how different projects were being served, how they were being funded, specifically the needs of the students, and what those were. And the things that weren't mentioned too was striking. I noticed we didn't mention certain efforts on campus, certain buildings on campus that relate to students from the minoritized backgrounds. And when we think about, we have a lot of athletes. And that's true. We also have a lot of first-generation college students. We have a lot of international students. We also have a lot of students of color. We have a lot of biracial students. We have a lot of students that are going through lower socioeconomic family situations who can barely make it at Whitworth. These are all students that we have to think about and play a huge percentage into our school. Not big enough to surpass the white majority, but big enough to pay attention to. I want to read something from the Newsweek article titled "Why Minority Students Don't Graduate." It says that state and federal governments should sharpen their focus everywhere by broadly publishing minority graduation rates. This is something we can look into, something we can look now at our school and see if we're doing that. For now, students and counselors must find their way to the website of the Education Trust, which compares data obtained from schools by the federal government. For years, private colleges such as Princeton and MIT have had success bringing in minorities onto campus in the summer before freshman year to give them a head start on college-level courses. This is a great initiative, by the way. The newer trend, however, is to start recruiting poor and non-white students as early as the 7th grade using innovative tools like hip-hop competitions to identify kids with sophisticated verbal finesse. Such programs can be expensive, of course, but cheap compared with the millions already invested in scholarships and grants for kids who have little chance to graduate without special support. With effort and money, the graduation gap can be closed. So this is, I think, a great article to think about when we think about the ways that our school can start to think about funding these things. And if you're a graduate and you're listening and you can identify with this or would like to help support this, I'm sure we always need donors. We always need donors. But I'm going to be more specific here. We always need donors from students who had a minority background and felt minoritized while they were here at Whitworth. And that's the thing. If they're coming here and they're coming to the school and they're not getting the experience that the majority of students are having, is there a correlation between that and what donor funding is what it's going to specifically? And how is that affecting students? And how is that affecting students' experience, especially if they're coming from these backgrounds? Just something to ponder. This stuff is heavy stuff. And I want us to think more seriously about this. If you're a student at Whitworth, if you're wondering ways that you can help, you can always ask questions. You can always dig deeper. You can always get down to the truth of things. If we don't do that as students, then we're throwing away our chance of being good students. I mean, one of the big reasons why college, I think, is such a great place is because we have the chance to learn more about ourselves. We have the chance to learn more about how we can be better citizens. And the best kind of citizens that I've ever seen are those who are always in the business of restoring and reconciling broken and unjust systems, and who expose them and show the ways that those systems could be better for all people. And if you're listening and that's something you feel led to, it's always good to start asking questions, especially at the administrative level. I'm going to leave a chance for a song break here, and for a chance for people to call in. If you're listening right now and you'd like to call in, that number is 509-777-3278. You're listening to InDifference, the podcast. Like I said, my name is Dylan. My co-host and good friend Ike is not in the studio this week, but if you'd like to give him a shout out, I'm sure he'd appreciate that. Yeah, so we're going to do a song break right now, and we'll be back in 2 songs. So this first one is a song by Lil Uzi Vert, featuring Oh Wonder. Actually, not featuring them. Let me be honest about this song for a sec. Oh Wonder, this is like their chorus that Lil Uzi Vert took from them. But it's a great song. It's called The Way Life Goes, and I hope you enjoy it. The last one was Silence by Marshmello featuring Khalid. Welcome back to the studio. If you're listening, my name's Dylan. This is the InDifference podcast. We are live from the Whitworth studio right now. We've been talking about university and college-related issues that are affecting students of minoritized backgrounds. So, welcome back to the show. I honestly, I think that this conversation. There's no good place to start with this sort of stuff. You just kind of have to dive into it. I just got done talking about the ways that colleges are steadily discriminating students, why students from the minority don't graduate from college. I was talking about how that directly correlates to funding, how that directly relates to the knowing what kind of students are funding the efforts, what kind of graduates are funding efforts for university stuff. Specifically, maybe asking better questions and getting answers is something that all students need to be doing to kind of expose these things. But I want to talk to you now, move gears a little bit more, talk about the students of color and mental health and the difference between that and their need in college. The JED Foundation, actually, which works with colleges on suicide prevention, and the Steve Fund, which promotes emotional well-being for young people of color, launched a study pretty recently about finding out what's preventing minority students from using mental health services on campuses. And they released survey results from the Harris poll taken last year. 1,500 students, ages 17 to 20. And it showed that Black and Hispanic students were more likely to feel overwhelmed in college, but also more likely to keep their concerns to themselves compared to their white classmates. White students were more likely than their Black and Hispanic classmates to feel both academically and emotionally prepared for college, the poll showed. White students were also twice as likely to be treated for various mental health issues. Ebony McGee, a researcher at Vanderbilt University, recently said that this speaks to the fact that Black folks have been talking about this pain and suffering for a long time now, and the typical response is, it's all in your head, or you need to suck it up. I think now we're saying, no, there are other options, and what can the institutions do? There's protests against racism on college campuses. Students have demanded better mental health treatment for students of color. And at the same time, students of all backgrounds are increasingly seeking on-campus mental health treatment at a rate that far outpaces that increase in enrollment, a recent report from Pennsylvania State University showed. And as more students are attending college, especially students of color are attending college these days, they're more likely, statistically speaking, to be first-generation college students or from lower-income backgrounds, which means that they're encountering their first chance to receive counseling services for their first time in their lives. This is important. This is also a big reason why students don't get the most out of their experiences. They're not exposed to what their experience even has to offer them. So we'll get into different ways that the administration can fix that. But just keep that in mind for now. They aren't less likely to take advantage of resources that they're not aware of. Yeah, so that's a huge component to this conversation. Also, just another thing that we need to think about too as a university is how do counselors relate to their people? It's not always productive for Black students and students of color to engage with counseling centers because there's a lot of white counselors who are often unprepared to understand the stress and anxiety that's come from a student's ethnic background or their race. It creates a sort of tension and dynamic that makes it harder for a student to open up, especially to someone that they can't relate to. But McGee said that when there's a higher the percentage of Black and Latino therapists at a university counseling center, there's more Black and Latino students that tend to use the services. That's just another thing that we need to think about. But I think the Steve Fund and the JED Foundation for putting in efforts into finding this information and these statistics. If you want to learn more about that, it's by a student named Tyler Kincaid, and he wrote this article, and it's titled "Students of Color Aren't Getting the Mental Health Help They Need in College," from the Huffington Post. And I think that's huge. That has huge implications for not just counseling services, but financial aid services, different services that like study or tutoring services that colleges have. The reason why it's so important is because when we think about students from minoritized backgrounds, you have to think about the resources that they both had and also don't have, especially as they're transitioning in college. I'm just going to speak out of my experience for a second. I came to Whitworth University as a freshman with little to no competency in how to be a good student, if I'm being honest. I had to come in with doing FAFSA on my own, learning how to get financial aid on my own, how to continually renew that, so to get new scholarships to continue my education. Whereas most students from the majority or higher income families have people doing this for them or know how to do this because they've done it before. And I don't know who I was telling this to, but I worry sometimes about my kids who will be a second generation college student. And I worry that they will be limited because they'll have had a dad who has been through college. But I'm hoping that they learn this stuff too, to become independent, to become also interdependent. I want to teach my kids a healthy level of both values, especially as a mixed race, biracial person. I've learned that in my family, how to have a little bit of both. But I think that this is important as we think about how a administration and how a university's administration can specifically get down to the issues of students. And it's a lot of it is by looking at what kind of students you have, and by thinking how can they be a part of the solution, because their experience is so unique and so valid that you can't replicate it. They need to be a part of the solution. And so moving forward, I want to think more critically about this. I want to give you, as an institution, if you're listening, different strategies that you can take to make sure that students from minoritized backgrounds and underrepresented backgrounds aren't being thrown to the side or aren't being essentially oppressed and systematically disadvantaged. And I want to help, if you're listening and you're an admin person, and if you know this stuff, great, implement it in your schools. If it is implemented, great. Then that means you must have a student body that is thriving in every different underrepresented group. But if you don't, and you're thinking critically about how to make your university better, and you're thinking about efforts into diversity, equity, and inclusion, these are important things to keep in mind. Number one, psychologically ease the transition into college. I also don't want to take credit for these. These are coming from the Century Foundation. The first one, is helping ease this transition into college. When they first come here, when students come here from minoritized backgrounds and different diverse groups, they should be introduced to first-year programs in place that are both financially accessible to all students and continue into the school year. And this should happen between, the acceptance letter and when they come to the school. This shouldn't happen the day that they get here. They're going through other things socially. They're going through other things academically. They don't have time to transition into college immediately that day, which is the biggest downfall of most universities. Think about constructing different groups that have intergroup contact theory and intergroup dialogue that helps promote the development of cross-group friendships, as well as reduces the out-group biases and prejudice. So think about ways that you can unite different groups together. These also don't have to always be minority. These can be pairing up students in the minority with students from the majority, giving them a taste of different things that students in the majority know about this institution that can be helpful for students who don't know those things. And framing your questions around that. That's why I love intergroup contact theory and intergroup dialogue, is because you're asking specific questions. That was step one. Step two, remind students that they're not alone. At the beginning of the show, I mentioned, if you're feeling this way, that you're not alone. If you're feeling any of these things that I've talked about today, know that you're not on your own in this battle. That these are conversations that have been happening for history, and also here at this school, at this institution, from students just like you. Step three, enhance the visibility of financial aid and work-study jobs. That's just important. That's something I think can be stressed to students, especially that are coming from first-generation backgrounds. Just helping make those things more known. I would caution institutions to be careful not to further stigmatize lower-income students, which oftentimes work-study jobs, like working in the dining hall, can do. But make sure that you're creating more visibility, jobs like research assistants, working in offices with alumni relations, admissions, student centers that provide students with resources to, in addition to money, such as connections, a network of connections. And they also help cultivate within the students' capacity of learning an inner working of the college. So there's different benefits that can come from creating more visibility of these sort of things. That was step 3. Step 4, ingrain within your student body an sense of acknowledgement, acceptance, celebration of multiculturalism. Don't operate out of the all too common color blindness, which tends to link different groups together and say, well, there's no difference between you. There's no difference between you and them. We're all the same. That sort of mindset is the exact reason why students feel like they're different, which different is good. Different is beautiful. If you are thinking for one moment that because of the color of your skin, you're not unique, that is a lie. You are unique. You are beautiful. And you deserve to have the experience that majority group students are having. I think that this value of multiculturalism also needs to be present within the mission statement, within curriculum, and especially here at Whitworth. I would argue that it needs to be evident in the theological program. And just kind of this idea that valuing interdependence is important in the classroom and at extracurricular activities. Step 5, treat discriminatory actions as dangerous, direct threats to a culture of inclusivity. And this is just saying that when colleges engage with bullying, harassment, or discrimination, you need to learn how to respond to these actions that signal to the students who are not part of the dominant culture how they are valued as part of the college community. Respond quickly, transparently, and seriously to behaviors that pose the risk of confirming to underrepresented groups that their worst fears regarding their value and safety within the college community is being disrupted. So that's different ways that the administration and the institution can do this. Faculty, if you're listening, if you're a professor and you've been wondering, I want to engage my students more, even if you're a teacher, think about how you can clarify the standards of evaluation. Talk about the different ways that different assignments are important and why they're being clarified and communicated the way that they are. Constantly take course evaluations seriously. Actually read those, because we as students actually engage with those so that you can understand how to be better at your job, especially if we're students from different backgrounds than the majority. I would also say, as a part of this too, to truly make classrooms safe spaces, professors need to openly communicate the methods and expectations for their evaluations so that poor grades aren't perceived as like prejudice. That happens so often within the classroom setting. We get a grade that's not the best, and we think, oh man, this professor just doesn't like me. And while that hopefully isn't the case, it creates a more transparent relationship between the professor and the student who's coming from a different background. Maybe explain the rationale behind that, so there's not an assumption made. So that was step 1 that faculty can use. Step 2, increase kind of a cooperative interdependence in the classroom. I think that like one of the biggest reasons why college students who come to a university setting who are coming from, not first generation or minority backgrounds is they're coming with different values like interdependency. And so they want to see that fostered in the classroom setting. They want to see how strong relationships between students of all different backgrounds are important. They want to see group projects in which students have to work with one another. So we want to break down those barriers and reduce that kind of discrimination that they constantly feel. Another big part that faculty can do is just communicate constructive feedback. Students that are coming are wanting to learn. That's the big reason why they come, is because they want to develop a bit. Another aspect of this is step 3 and 4. Teach with a growth mindset. Talk about how a student comes in to the classroom in the belief that the student walks out changed. I would say too, it's important that you communicate your belief in the student's ability to succeed. it kind of holds that students' abilities are stable and unchanging if you have a fixed mindset. But if you have a growth mindset, you have these ability to change and can be developed by identifying challenges, applying the right strategies, and persisting through difficulties. A lot of these students come in with a lot of tough backgrounds that they've had to persevere and grow through. And I think they just want to relate that to their classroom setting, their academics, the academia. They want to relate their story to the content that they're studying. And that gives them a sense of identity when you do that. So those are the last things that I was going to share with you guys. If you're listening still, thank you so much for just sticking around and constantly supporting the InDifference podcast. I hope this session was informal. It's for you to learn something new that you didn't know coming in, to expose you to the actual truths of the university system, and to talk about ways that the university can grow, because we believe that reconciliation and growth is important, and that's a huge part of the student experience. So that being said, it's been a great night, guys, and I hope that you tune in next week. Actually, nope, don't tune in next week. Next week we will be gone on our break. I won't be here. I won't be here. It'll just be silent, or no, there'll be music playing, but it won't be the podcast. So if you're listening, thank you so much. My name's Dylan. This is InDifference, the podcast. If you've been listening and you want to call in, now's a great time to call in. If not, no worries. But I did want to end with a song by Lil Uzi Vert featuring Pharrell Williams titled Neon Guts. So yeah, my name's Dylan. This is the InDifference podcast. Hope you stick around. And we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. So this is me signing off.